populism.
It is a shock and surprise that what's happened in terms of the consequence of President Trump's phony populism has happened. And it is disappointing that so many of my Republican colleagues in the Senate, who I know better, have been reluctant to take on, for example, an investigation because they're worried about being primaried.
I think it's really interesting there. It's unusual for a president to speak in such frank terms about a predecessor and a predecessor's political movement. But certainly this isn't usual, this turning of the page from Trump to Biden.
Well, and one of the reasons I think he's addressing it is that he understands his colleagues on the world stage are paying attention to all of this, too. This whole idea of, well, America is back, but for how long? Anybody can look at what's happening in Washington and look at our political system and see that Trump has not gone away. Trumpism has not gone away. So what does that mean for America and the world? These are very big questions about how America plays in the rest of the world. Vladimir Putin is watching, and he's tried to, he's gone through cycles of feeling isolated by a united West and then seeing less unity and finding ways to create those breaks in that Western alliance. So I think so much of the meeting tomorrow is about theater, because it's always about theater for Putin. He wants legitimacy. He likes that there's a big buildup to all of this. So the real question is, are there areas where this administration and Putin can actually cooperate? And can they find some way to bring some leverage on Putin to stop the thing he can do the best, which is to be disruptive, let alone what he's doing regionally, but to be disruptive with cyber attacks. So I think Biden is addressing that to try to say to the world community that he's on the stage with, look, not even my Republican colleagues believe in all of this, but there's so much fear. So, let's try to, move in a concerted direction again. That's going to take some time.
But like you said, Trump is gone, but for how long? I
Right.
mean, Putin has lasted through several American presidents. And the question is, does Trump come back? Is there someone like Trump who comes in here in 3 to 4 years? And I also noticed, we spoke with the Secretary General of NATO last week, and you really get the sense, talking to officials, they don't feel that Trump is securely out of the way.
Right. And again, it's what does a Biden presidency actually look like in terms of the commitment of the United States overseas? What's the United States posture against China over trade, for example, as well as, regional concerns that are security concerns versus how the Europeans play it. So I think we're in a much different place. I mean, we've come through a period under President Bush of projection of American power in the rest of the world, a sort of unwinding of that by Biden, then a complete unwinding by Trump, and now Biden, who represents a real return to an older way of doing business in Europe. And I don't know that it's clear exactly what that means in terms of American engagement against Russia, against China. And I think there's a lot of our traditional allies who are waiting to see. And Putin in particular is going to wait to see and is going to try to take Biden's measure. But again, I thought it was interesting if there's a talk of prisoner exchanges. Putin is also shrewd enough to know where to cooperate, as he did after 9/11, as he did in trying to temper Iran's nuclear program. He finds ways to communicate and to negotiate with the American president where he can, as long as it keeps, giving him room.
John, I think that Biden was sort of setting that expectation himself, saying that Putin is bright and tough and a worthy adversary just ahead of this meeting.
There's been like 2 weeks of pregame from both leaders, really, from both countries leading up to this summit tomorrow. I know everyone's trying to lower the bar, but the bar is what it is at this point. And I think the whole world is watching to see how these two men behave next to each other. Everyone stand by for a second here. We want to reset because in just moments, we're going to hear from President Biden as he meets with EU leaders. This comes just before the most consequential stretch of his European tour. Moments ago, he did enter a meeting with EU leaders declaring America is back and committed to a great relationship with NATO and the European Union. This afternoon, the president leaves for Geneva, to meet with Vladimir Putin. We've been told he's preparing nonstop for the summit and says he's ready to let the Russian leader know exactly what America expects.
And the areas where we don't agree, make it clear what the red lines are. I have met with him. He's bright, he's tough, and I have found that he is as they say when you used to play ball, a worthy adversary.
That was the quote there. Overnight, the Kremlin said it is ready to hand over certain U.S. citizens who are imprisoned in Russia, while the retired federal judge who sentenced a notorious Russian arms trafficker to prison is calling for a prisoner swap. Let's get more now on this development from CNN's Matthew Chance. He is joining us live from Geneva, where we will be seeing this meeting happen between Putin and Biden. Tell us the latest from where you are.
Yeah, that meeting, Brianna, is going to be happening 24 hours from now. That's according to the schedule. So we'll obviously be bringing that to you. The fraught issues, the list of fraught issues, obviously, as long as your arm when it comes to the relationship between these two countries, whether it's a situation with hacking, the situation in Ukraine, the crackdown on dissidents at home, all these things are going to be discussed. And it's going to be a pretty tense meeting, is my prediction. One of the issues, though, is that issue of prisoner exchanges, the potential for both countries to hand over citizens that are in their jails. There are 2 American citizens, at least, that are contentious, at least, in a Russian jail. Paul Whelan, Trevor Reed. We've heard from their family, of course, making personal appeals to Presidents Biden and Putin to try and find a way to get them released. But, of course, if that's going to happen, there's going to have to be well, to coin a phrase, quid pro quo. There's going to have to be something coming back from the American side. And what the Russians want are some pretty high-level criminals. They want, for instance, Konstantin Yaroshenko, who's convicted of conspiracy to smuggle cocaine, large amounts of it, and Victor Bout, who was one of the world's most notorious arms traffickers. But there's been an intervention on his part as well. The judge that originally gave him the sentence back in 2012. Her name is Shira Scheindlin. She's retired now. But she's made this intervention to CNN saying, look, his sentence basically is long enough. He's served enough of it already. I think he's been in prison for 13 years. If we can, exchange him for a prisoner who's just served, an American prisoner who's just served 3 years of his sentence, she's referring to Paul Whelan, then that's something that should be sort of considered. And so, one of the holdups has been, when it comes to a prisoner swap, that the Americans say that the balance isn't right. The people the Russians want back are much higher level criminals than the people the Americans want returned to the United States. But it's ultimately something for the 2 presidents to discuss and to decide on. Brianna.
And we will see what they come up with. Matthew, thank you so much live for us from Geneva, Switzerland. And joining me now is former CIA Senior Intelligence Officer Mark Polymeropoulos. He was in charge of the CIA's clandestine operations in Europe and Eurasia from 2017 to 2019. He is the author of the new book, Clarity in Crisis, Leadership Lessons from the CIA. Mark, it is great to have you here this morning at such a pivotal time here. And I'm wondering what your reaction is to this judge calling for a U.S.-Russian prisoner swap.
Sure. Well, first, Brianna, great to be here. And I think that, in terms of what the judge actually said, it's a little unprecedented. This is a retired judge who seems to be having some qualms about a mandatory sentence handed down to Victor Bout. So I think, I would put that aside. It's a little murky on why this judge would come out and say these things. But ultimately, Vladimir Putin is taking a page out of the autocratic playbook because there's Americans in jail on trumped up charges. And in return, he, of course, wants some Russian criminals, particularly Victor Bout, a notorious arms dealer. He wants him back. So, this is a distraction, I believe, but it's something that certainly is on the agenda now. Why this judge, this former judge, decided to come out certainly remains a bit murky.
Do you think ultimately these Americans will be released?
Well, at some point, they have to be because they're there on trumped up charges. They're being held in poor conditions. There's a huge concern about, COVID outbreaks in Russian jails. Look, we've had spy espionage swaps in the past. It's coming up on the 10-year anniversary of a really big one. But ultimately, a swap of this nature in which the Russians really captured 2 Americans who were innocent and they want back some notorious criminals, that would set a bad precedent. The one thing I'll say on this, though, this is a test of leadership. I mean, being president is not easy. President Biden does have immense pressure from the U.S. families. And so, this probably does cause him sleepless nights. But in the end, it's likely to be a pretty poor precedent to set if we go through with this.
Yeah, we heard from Trevor Reed's mother yesterday, who said she doesn't care how he comes back. She just wants her son back,
Right.
which perhaps is what you would expect from a mom. As we are watching, the world is watching this meeting that is going to be happening here in a day with Vladimir Putin and President Biden. What are the pitfalls as you see them potentially for President Biden? Because, this is a high-risk meeting.
Sure. So, first and foremost, I don't think we should really expect any, deliverables coming back from the Russians, because Vladimir Putin does not want to give any. Ultimately, I think this summit is going through, in terms of from the U.S. side, based on optics. I think we all, whether you're Republican or Democrat or myself, who was in the CIA at the time, everyone has PTSD from the 2018 Helsinki summit. That was a diplomatic disaster. That was where President Trump, sided with Vladimir Putin in terms of the call the U.S. intelligence agencies made on Russian interference. So I think this has a lot to do with optics. President Biden wants to certainly put forward, both domestically to the United States, but to the world, that the U.S. is back and we will take a stronger tone on Russia. So ultimately, I don't expect much to come of it, but just to go forward and take that tough tone is probably worth it.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of what happened in Helsinki, the bar here is low. It's very hard to see, even before this meeting happens, how Biden does not surpass that. But at the same time, there's this language that Putin speaks, right, that is solely about strength and about how that strength is projected. And to that end, Biden has been preparing intensely for Putin's tactics. He is, after all, a former KGB officer. These are two men with very different backgrounds. How do you think he needs to approach that?
So look, I think words really don't matter as much as actions. And so, what I would like to see from the United States, and we've been seeing this, and certainly under President Biden's leadership, is to put forward, the defend forward strategy. So that entails several things. First and foremost, we have to, counter the Russia in terms of cyber warfare. And so, with the ransomware attacks on the Colonial Pipeline and the meatpacking plant, this is something that cannot stand. So we have to take an offensive cyber strategy, and we've been doing that. Second, we have to work with our allies.
I'm going to have you pause for a moment. Let's listen into the president in Belgium.
And we're at the G7, and again today, I apologize. I kept my colleagues in the closed meeting. But I want to, this is, I haven't been back to Brussels, the EU, since 2017. And since back then, also the first summit back in 2014. But I brought the A-team with me today. And, I've said both publicly and privately that America's back, and which is why we're here in full force. I'm happy to have with me today the members of my cabinet, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. He suffers from the problem of having worked with me for years. And also Trade Representative Ambassador Kathy Tai, who has made some real progress already. And Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo, who was a first-rate governor and one of the brightest people that we work with, and agreed to come on as our Secretary of Commerce. And one of the things that you and I were talking about, come as no shock to either of you, Europe is our natural partner. And the reason is we're committed to the same democratic norms and institutions, and they are increasingly under attack. And I've said before, and I apologize to repeat. I didn't. Dave Sullivan, my national security advisor. I'm leaving out a lot of people here. I apologize. I'm going to get in trouble. But anyway, we'll get back to that. But there's a lot that is happening. I used to always my friends would kid me in the United States Senate, because I served there, for always quoting Irish poets. I think I quoted Irish poets because I'm Irish. That's not the reason. I quote them because they're the best poets in the world. But all kidding aside, there's a stanza from a poem of an Irish poet who was just lost. He said, "All's changed utterly. A terrible beauty has been born." I think all has changed in the last 10, 12 years, and it's not because of any one person. I think we're in the midst of a terrible beauty having been born, a great shift in technology, a great shift in development in the world, and it's causing great anxiety in each of our countries and uncertainty among many of our colleagues of what's going to be their place in the world. They're going to be replaced by new technology. Are they going to no longer have a job? And what are they going to do? And that comes along at the same time that also generates, when uncertainty is generated politically like that about individuals, it also generates some folks who are less than, how can I say it, somewhat more like charlatans, trying to take advantage of those concerns. And we see it in Europe, we see it in the United States, we've seen it around the world, this phony populism. So it seems to me that the best answer to deal with these changes is that to have a circumstance where our economies grow, and they grow together, and they grow still based on the value set that united us in the first place. And I think we do share just the same basic values of human dignity, human rights. My colleagues, I'll be very colloquial with you. My dad had a transition where in the city we lived in, coal was dying. It was no longer relevant. He was not, my great-grandfather was a coal miner. He was a mining engineer. But when in northeastern Pennsylvania, when coal died, my dad was a salesperson, and the economy collapsed, and we moved to another part where there were jobs in down in Delaware, just across the Pennsylvania border. And my family, my siblings and I would hear him often use the following expression. He said, "Joe, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the community. It's about being able to look your child in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay, and mean it." I think we sometimes forget that. It's about the dignity of the worker and them being able to hold their head high. And so I think we have an enormous opportunity if we think in terms of these changes, particularly in terms of global warming. If we think of it in terms of jobs, the kind of jobs that we're going to have to create to preserve the environment are jobs that can pay well, that are going to be new technologies that working class, blue-collar workers, as we say in the States, will be able to make more money, be able to do well. But we have to, all of us, accommodate those changes and provide for them. And so I think we have a lot to deal with, from COVID-19 to whether or not we're in a position that we can generate the kind of strengthening transatlantic trade and technological cooperation. They're sort of a different set of priorities with the same objective. How do like-minded countries sharing the same values work together to improve the living standards for not only our people, but for the rest of the world? And I think we have the capacity to do that. And it's going to take an awful lot of hard work and determination. And I'll conclude by saying one of the reasons I'm optimistic is because of our younger generation. In Europe as well as the United States, the young generation, this one, is the best educated in American history. It is also the least prejudiced. the most open, and the most committed. And I think that we have reason to believe that if we provide the policies that are consistent to provide for the kind of growth and opportunities for them, and education plays a gigantic part of that, I think the future is very, very bright. I think we have an opportunity to do some really very good things. And with that, I should, as my mother would say, I should hush up and let this discussion move
President Biden at a meeting of the European Union there. Now, one thing to note is he's a guest here. Up until this point, we've seen him with the G7 and NATO, where the United States very much a member and the leading member. Here, he's a guest of the European Union. Talked about the great shift the entire world faces and how America wants Europe as an ally in that shift. Joining me once again, Hagar Shamali. Hagar, thanks so much for being with us. It was interesting to hear President Biden talk about this great shift. In some ways, it's been the theme of this trip. It's a shift in terms of world politics, from democracy to populism and the dangers that are faced there, but also a shift in terms of the direction that the U.S. is now facing as it looks to its adversaries.
Right. If you look at this trip from the 60,000-foot level, after the last 4 years in particular, you have President Biden reinforcing these key themes of strong alliances and key democratic shared values, and what that means when you put that all together, right? When you unite that, the type of national security challenges or global crises like the pandemic or economic recovery that you can address will be all the more effective. And I think that that's important in particular because over the last 4 years, but certainly before as well, you've had a rise in populism around the world. You've had authoritarian leaders acting with impunity, certainly with human rights abuses. You've seen that all over in Turkey, in Saudi Arabia, in China, in Russia, and so on. And to me, when I was looking at this, as someone who's worked on these issues for a long time, I saw this as historic and a milestone, and I hope that this sets things in a different trajectory, in a more positive way, to reinforce democratic values, to put authoritarians on the heels so that they understand that people are watching, that they're not going to be able to do whatever they want without accountability and justice of some kind.
He was there with the Secretary of State, Secretary of Commerce, and U.S. Trade Rep. So the message there is it's not just about diplomacy, but also about economics as well. An important meeting, to say the least. Hagar Shamali, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Thanks.
Brianna?
How far did the former president and his allies go to push the big election lie? CNN has obtained new emails showing the pressure campaign on the Department of Justice.
Deja vu for Democrats? What?
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell setting the stage for another potential Supreme Court nominee showdown if he regains control of the Senate after the 2022 midterms. Asked if he would apply the same rule in 2024 that he implemented in 2016 when he blocked Merrick Garland's nomination by former President Barack Obama to fill Justice Antonin Scalia's vacancy, McConnell said this.
No, I think it's highly unlikely. In fact, no, I don't think either party, if it were different from the president, would confirm a Supreme Court nominee in the middle of an election. What was different in 2020 was we were of the same party as the president. Yeah.
Now, McConnell's threat to block a future Biden Supreme Court pick comes as we await several of the most significant opinions from the high court this term. So for more on this, let's bring in our Supreme Court reporter, Ariane DeVogue. Okay, Ariane, walk us through this. What are the big decisions that we're still waiting on here?
Right. We have only about 2 weeks left in this term, and the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on some of the most high-profile cases. So that's unusual. Here we are on some of them. First of all, the Affordable Care Act. Texas and Republican-led states, they want to gut the entire law. Remember Chief Justice John Roberts? He saved it under the taxing power a few years ago. And then Congress moved to bring that tax penalty down to zero. So critics raced to court. They said, you've gotten rid of the legal underpinning of the law. So the whole thing is unconstitutional. At oral arguments, it didn't seem like the justices were going to go that far, but we'll have to watch it. There's also an interesting religious liberty case. Philadelphia froze the contract of a Catholic foster care agency because the agency refused to work with same-sex couples as potential parents. So the agency turned around and sued, and they said that's a violation of our free exercise rights. This court has already, the conservative court, moved the court to the right when it comes to religious liberty. So we'll see how far they go to talk about what the government can do to limit laws that impinge on religious freedom. And then there's an interesting voting rights case. A lower court struck down 2 provisions of Arizona voting rights law, saying that they violated the historic Voting Rights Act. Remember, the court in past years gutted one provision of the Voting Rights Act. That was Chief Justice John Roberts. So all eyes are on the justices to see if they're going to further limit this law. And of course, it comes when Republican-led states are moving very aggressively to push more voting restriction laws. So all eyes on the Supreme Court on that. And finally, there's a really interesting student school speech. So it goes to how far schools can go to regulate speech that occurs off campus, not on campus. It was brought by a cheerleader who was trying to get on the varsity cheerleading squad. She didn't get on. She posted over the weekend a profanity-laced social media post. The school saw it. They suspended her from the JV squad, and her parents turned around and sued, said that violates free speech. Schools can't reach outside of campus to restrict speech. So the justices will look at that. Of course, it comes in the age of the internet. And also, as students have been working remotely, that'll be a fascinating case to watch. There's still a handful more. And it's very odd that we haven't yet gotten a big decision so far, so late in the term.
Yeah, it certainly is. I'm really watching that student speech one. I think she sent the social media post from a convenience store, but clearly a lot of people saw it at her school. So what is this going to mean for students? We'll see. Ariane, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to talk a little bit more about the new Mitch McConnell marker. So let's bring in CNN chief legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Jeffrey Toobin. We heard Mitch McConnell say that he would do the Merrick Garland thing all over again. The last year, if the Republicans control the Senate, absolutely he would block a nomination. He said that out loud. But he also said more than that, Jeffrey, when Hugh Hewitt asked him, well, what about if the Republicans take over the full 2 years? Listen.
If you are back as the Senate Republican leader, and I hope you are, and a Democrat retires at the end of 2023 and there are 18 months, that would be the Anthony Kennedy precedent. Would they get a fair shot at a hearing? Not a radical, but a normal mainstream liberal?
Well, we'd have to wait to see what happens.
Can I translate that? No.
Right.
That's what he meant. No. There is going to be no Supreme Court nomination even heard if Joe Biden is still presumably he'll still be the president after the midterms and the Republicans take over the Senate. Now, we don't know whether they will, but if they do, that's it for Supreme Court nominations for a Democratic president. So the window for a vacancy to be filled is now shrinking to about a year and a half. And that's not a long time, given how long these things can take.
Now, everyone on earth, everyone in the United States, certainly everyone in Washington seems to recognize that at this point, that that's the timeline that is being worked with here, except for one man.
That's one person.
And that man may be Stephen Breyer,
exactly.
Justice on the Supreme Court, who was nominated by Bill Clinton, seen as one of the more liberal judges. Now, how old? 82 years old. And there are Democrats who want him to retire now so Biden can nominate someone to fill.
There are all the Democrats now who want him to leave. But it's up to him. And Breyer has a very distinctive view. Many people think an archaic view of the Supreme Court, which is that it should be seen as an apolitical institution and that the justices should not time their resignations based on who's the president or who's in control of the Senate. He has said to me many times, Stephen Breyer has, I hate when you journalists say, the Democratic nominees voted one way and the Republican nominees voted the other. We're all judges. We're not politicians. The Democratic response to that, by and large, is, are you out of your mind? Do you not see what's going on? Do you not see the way Trump, McConnell have manipulated this process to install their judges and prevent Democratic presidents from installing their judges? but he's in charge of whether he resigns. So, it's just up to him.
Do you think he would budge?
I do. I do think that he may leave anyway. He likes, he is also in touch with the real world in his heart, but the way he speaks publicly, and he's also, unlike Ruth Ginsburg in her 80s, he seems to be in vigorous health. He has not had many bouts with cancer, so he seems to, and he is, fully got all his marbles. But it's up to him.
All right, stand by 1 second, Jeffrey, because there's something more we want to discuss. Some developing news that Brianna has here.
So there are new emails, John, that reveal how former President Trump and his allies pressured the Justice Department to investigate baseless claims of voter fraud and conspiracies in the 2020 election. And CNN's Whitney Wild is with us now with her new reporting. What did you find out?
Well, what we see is from this document dump that we got, a list of emails that really show the evolution of this relentless pressure from the White House beginning about mid-December all the way through the beginning of January to try to convince the Department of Justice to take their side in these election fraud lawsuits. So a couple examples of that are we see several members of the White House as well as people who were sort of in the private Trump orbit. So these are attorneys that were floating around Trump world at this time. And they are continuously reaching out to the Department of Justice and saying things like, the President of the United States has asked me to reach out to you, and he has seen this lawsuit I would like you to file that backs up our election fraud claims. And so, again, many people apparently thinking that if they invoked the president's name, said that they were working on his behalf, that would somehow convince the Department of Justice to take up their side. And over this several-week period, we see an evolution of people within the Justice Department at least having the conversation, allowing these emails to come in, but they grow more and more frustrated. So this culminates in two ways. The first is with basically there was this Rudy Giuliani ally who was peddling this outlandish conspiracy theory that there were Italian satellites that were somehow manipulating the vote counts here in the United States. And this person had asked then Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen to broker a meeting between this person and the FBI. And Jeffrey Rosen says, look, if this guy has any evidence, he can walk into the FBI's Washington field office and tell them everything he knows. But then he gets so frustrated, and this is what he writes to his number two at the Justice Department, Richard Donahue. He says, I flatly refused to broker this meeting. I said I would not be giving any special treatment to Giuliani or any of his witnesses, and reaffirmed yet again that I will not talk to Giuliani about any of this. So the moment he figures out this guy's working on behalf of Rudy Giuliani, Jeffrey Rosen had it. He said he's absolutely not doing that. And then there was another moment where this really highlights the anxiety within the Justice Department about how this was all going to play out. There was a January 3rd meeting in which a guy named Jeffrey Clark and then Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen and others went to the White House. And Jeffrey Clark, who was at the time heading the civil division for the Department of Justice, was trying to convince the president to name him acting attorney general. And his pitch was basically, I can take this election fraud thing over the finish line, pick me, pick me. And Jeffrey Rosen argued his case. And in the end, cooler, more legally sound minds won. And so after that meeting, which they were worried would be extraordinarily consequential, there was a conference call. And Jeffrey Rosen, and others within the Justice Department breathed a sigh of relief. And then finally, there was another person within the Justice Department who says this in an email. It appears that the cause of justice, sorry, that full screen's a little far from me. It sounds like Rosen and the cause of justice won. So again, this big sigh of relief within the Justice Department, but we are talking about just 3 days before the riot. And again, what it shows is this evolution within the Justice Department. People are growing more and more frustrated by this relentless pressure, but in the end, they didn't break, Brianna.
I like that you said that full screen was far away. I thought I was the only one that it was very far away. But this is an incredibly bizarre attempt at an end run around the normal process, right?
Absolutely. And so one of the things that we saw in this is 230 pages of documents, is a private attorney going to the Department of Justice and saying, hey, I have this lawsuit we'd like you to file. This is modeled after some of the other Texas lawsuits, or the single other Texas lawsuit. You can file this. And the president has seen it. He's on board. Go ahead, take that to court. Take that to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
just a reminder, they have attorneys at the Justice Department who write their own lawsuits. They don't need private attorneys to be peddling these lawsuits about election fraud. The emails really highlight and bring much more detail to this idea that there was just a lot of hysteria within the White House at this time. Numerous outreach from Mark Meadows trying to convince the Justice Department to look into these allegations. I mean, it just went on. And again, in the end, the Justice Department had just had it by early January, Brianna.
It's pretty stunning, Berman, when you look at what we're seeing.
Indeed. All right. Jeffrey Toobin is back with us on this front. And Jeffrey, I have two reactions here, 2.5. The first one is wow. Yeah. The second one is, so Jeffrey Rosen was the last line of defense for democracy there, and then my extra half reaction is wow again.
Well, and good for Jeffrey Rosen. We have belabored the Trump Justice Department for its politicization throughout the 4 years of his presidency. But it is worth remembering, by this point, William Barr, who had done a lot of Trump's bidding, had quit more or less in protest about the crazies who were in charge at the White House. And Rosen, who is known as a less political figure, is in charge, and he held the line. But I think Whitney mentioned a very important point here, which is that the proximity to January 6th, that, this hysteria is building in the White House. And if, this is part of the story of how January 6th happened. You have, on one hand, these people pushing these really wackadoodle legal theories and so-called evidence about fraud. At the same time, they're gathering people in Washington to protest. And, what the White House's complicity is in January 6th is a question we still don't know. But this is part of that story, and it's crying out for an answer.
I have to say, democracy held, but the more we learn, the more it feels like it held barely.
It was fragile.
All right, Jeffrey, thank you very much.
We're about to cross 600,000 American deaths from COVID-19, a sobering milestone that is coming as vaccination efforts have slowed the virus down considerably, but it's still taking a toll. Let's talk about this now with CNN chief medical correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Sanjay, I just rewind to the beginning of this, when we thought about the numbers that we were told we might see. I don't think anyone was prepared for this, and yet this has become our normal. 600,000.
Yeah, it seems incomprehensible. And, every time I've been thinking about these numbers, it sort of still takes my breath away. I still get some tightness in the chest just thinking about this. You look at the trajectory of sort of where we've been. And one of the things that really strikes me is that I remember having this conversation with Ambassador Birx, Deborah Birx, who was the task force coordinator for coronavirus. And she told me at one point that after those first 100,000, when we were still sort of grappling and trying to understand what had happened here, she believes that basically all the rest of the deaths after that could have been greatly mitigated or prevented, which is hard to say. That's 500,000 people. We knew that going into this pandemic, if you looked at indices around the world, the United States should have been the best prepared in the world, given our resources and our ability to respond to these sorts of things. And if you look overall how we did compared to other countries, we did the worst. I hate saying it. It's the truth. We are 4% of the world's population. We had about 16% of the world's deaths. And you can compare this to other countries and see what's happening. And obviously, this is still not over. But that is sort of what happened here in the United States. I think the question.
There are these new studies that find that it doubles the risk of hospitalizations. Clearly it seems more contagious and more dangerous. What else do you know about it, Sanjay?
Yeah, so, if you look at some of the data, we got to look around the world here. That's the nature of a pandemic. You can start to gather sort of clues from around the world. We can see, first of all, what's happening here in the United States. The numbers of the newly diagnosed people, what's the likelihood that their diagnosis will be due to the Delta variant. It's sort of roughly, doubling every couple of weeks or so. It's exactly the same sort of pattern that we saw with the UK or Alpha variant. So if something is more transmissible, this appears to be about 60% more transmissible than the UK variant, which was more transmissible than the strain before that, that means it will become the dominant strain. It's just a question of how long that takes. And because it is more transmissible and we know it causes more hospitalizations, that's the real concern, primarily for people who are not vaccinated. Let me show you quickly the effectiveness of the vaccines against these strains. I think this is really crucially important. When these vaccines came out, we knew they were very protective against the circulating strain at that point. But what we have learned, and this is good news, is that they also appear to be very effective against these variants as well. So 92% with Pfizer against the Alpha strain, and it drops down 79%, but still very effective and very effective against severe disease. That's the good news for people who are vaccinated. I think there's two things that are concerning. Obviously, people who are not vaccinated are at higher risk. They may have gotten away with, encounters where they did not get infected. But if something is 60% more transmissible than even the UK variant, it's very hard to get away with things. As Barney Graham, who's the deputy director at the NIH, said to me, we keep thinking of America as vaccinated and unvaccinated. What happens, if you look at this, is that America becomes vaccinated and infected. It is just very hard to escape the contagiousness of this virus. The second thing is, as the virus continues to spread, you get more variants. I mean, hopefully the variants do not become or are not problematic, but if you do develop a new variant that starts to escape immunity more and more, that puts the vaccinated at risk again, and frankly, the whole world. So that's what everyone's trying to avoid by trying to get the vaccines out as quickly as possible. So having said all that, the message remains the same. Get vaccinated. Get vaccinated because of those variants. Get vaccinated so we don't have more of them.
Yeah. It's so dangerous, as we watch this new variant. It's pretty stunning how different it is compared to other ones for folks who are unvaccinated. I do want to talk to you about our Christiane Amanpour, Sanjay, who I think I can say our CNN family is standing firmly behind her today, giving her all the strength that we can, as she made the following statement on our air about being diagnosed with ovarian cancer.
Like millions of women around the world, I have been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I've had successful major surgery to remove it, and I'm now undergoing several months of chemotherapy for the best possible long-term prognosis. I'm fortunate to have health insurance through work and incredible doctors who are treating me in a country underpinned by the brilliant NHS. I'm telling you all this, of course, in the interest of